And after what seems like an eternity, I got a new one, and that's finally in. But the oil pump is actually in finally as well. They're both here, and now I can actually start doing the rest of this. Unfortunately, to do the oil pump and get the oil pickup, to do that I have to obviously drop the oil pan, but there is a brace on the underside. So the exhaust needs dropped, and I have a couple braces, right, that one right there. I'm in the area of the oil pump, so I might as well do the oil pump, get that gasket all nice and redone up. The one that I did get is from a company called Evergreen, which I have never heard of before, but now I've got a little bit more cleaning to do on the inside of here. And in a blink of an eye, the oil pump is now missing off of the actual car now. I still have to actually clean up all the gasket work around there and prep it, don't get me wrong, but at least every part that I want to replace for this rebuild is technically off of the vehicle, and now I can proceed forward to cleaning and reassembling and hopefully not having to do this again. I'm pretty sure that was my failure point and why it was just kind of spewing oil out the backside of the motor. And the car's doing pretty well, or at least it was before I started messing with it. So I'm gonna go ahead and hopefully get all of these oil leaks sealed up to where I don't have to spend any extra money on oil in between oil changes. But it's time to get this cleaned up and actually back together. And now the oil pump is prepped, as the gasket that came with it is in place in between the strainer here and the actual body where it connects there. But got that little O-ring in there. That is very important because that is a main leak point. So I'm gonna go ahead and let this dry a little bit, probably for about half an hour, 45 minutes, just because I like to make sure it's all good. And then I'm gonna go ahead and meanwhile clean up the other area and get this all put back together. And if you find yourself in the same predicament as me putting in your oil pump, just make sure that those nuts up there on the shiny, I don't know if you can, yeah, up there, okay, towards the top, right, yeah, there you go. Okay, so those two nuts right there holding the actual strainer on, make sure that those aren't tight. When you can kind of slip that in together as one unit with the oil pump itself, but the two holes on the bottom here didn't want to actually line up enough to where those are tight up there, and these did not want to actually go through. So I went ahead and just loosened that up for a second, and then this allowed enough play for me to be able to slip those bolts in. So now I can get all four of those tightened up, just so you know. I don't know if anyone's ever told you this, but there's an easy way to help get the tension off of that. If you've ever had to do timing before and you're just fighting with trying to get everything lined up and get that belt on there with the tensioner, here's the thing, because again, this is a budget build, so I'm reusing that timing belt, which has a lot of play in it still. I mean, it's not brand new, okay? It's not horrible, but it's not brand new is what I'm saying. And we have a brand new tensioner right there, and everything is tensioned up. Now, what I did was wrap it around the crank down here, and then I actually came up top and used the water pump to help draw everything. I put everything on the belt as far as I could on down below, and then I put one tooth on the front side because there's nothing in between this camshaft on the front side down to the crank. So they should be on the right tooth, but you don't have enough length in the belt technically to get everything wrapped on there. So what I did was actually hand twisted that water pump, and that helped draw that tensioner out really well to where I could get the rest of this belt on here without any extra trouble. So I felt that was a easy way that maybe you might be able to do in the future. Again, you know what I mean? Like I put this on here on the belt, and this is all in the right spot where it's supposed to be. So next thing I do, I just went down here and started hand twisting the actual water pump and using those ridges on the water pump to help draw that belt, and that made it so much simpler. So I'm going to rotate this motor, make sure it's actually in time and nothing is off or going to bang or clank when I try to actually go and start this. But now the timing pin is pulled on the actual timing tensioner. This whole timing is set now, and the spark plugs are also cleaned and installed inside of each one of those right there. So that's all set. Now the and this is the end result for cleaning it with, well, a little pick and pretty much a little flathead. No cleaner. That would have been nice to use brake cleaner, but I'm on a budget. So this is the end result, which is pretty darn good because there is like very little to nothing in there. I scraped out so much and it's looking pretty darn good. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw this back on the car, and this would take up one more gasket out of the whole gasket set. So one down and maybe 15 pieces to go. And now the fuel pressure line is on and the return line is on. I had to cut that back just a little bit because I didn't like the way that looked on the end of it, so snip that a little bit and push that back on. Got a better clamp, an actual fill line clamp, not the factory one that has over 200,000 miles on it. And I gotta say, most out of this whole project, this is probably the most annoying part, is actually putting the intake back on. I had to fight the two lower brackets. There's two bolts on this side and there's one on this side, but then you have to actually undo that bolt to actually get these to wiggle right to get this to fit in, because the way that it's slotted is just not right. So just letting you know, the intake and putting the bolts back in is by far the most annoying part of this whole project. Even timing it wasn't bad at all. Like, that was totally just stationary, normal, and like I said, with a little trick of twisting the water pump to get the slack out of that back side of the line, it makes it hella easy. So now that I have the fuel lines on there, I have literally one nut left for the intake, and it is the worst. You can get a little bit more room with a wrench and trying to go from this side here, driver's side, but I'm also trying to go over from this side and stick my hand up under there. There's no way for me to get up under there. So there is this last one that I have to figure out how to get on there, which hopefully I don't have to go up under here, because there's a ton of dirt up under there. I'm just not trying to lay in it, and I gave my neighbor my creeper crawler, so no worries. I will try and figure out how to get that last bolt on for the intake, and then I'm on to doing a valve cover rebuild, which will be the little bit of this is all that we have left now, and these are going to be the grommets for the 10 millimeters to hold down the valve cover. This is the valve cover gasket itself, and then these are for the spark plug holes, so then you don't have oil splashing up and into where your spark plugs actually sit down there, so that won't foul out and ruin the ignition coils with an early death there. So this is what's left in the kit, which isn't very many parts, which is why I wanted to reiterate saying the fact that when you do a big project like this, look at all the pieces that you have in there and try to identify which one is which. That's fine if you don't know, but just trying to take these pieces and parts out as big as possible, because you don't know when you're gonna need another gasket or something. Because I had to go into the oil pump and do that, the oil pump did not come with a oil pan gasket, so I did have to reuse the oil pan gasket for this. But it didn't look horrible. Regardless, I don't mind going back and doing an oil pan gasket if I have to on this. That's not a problem. I twisted the motor over as I got the timing right, and it didn't sound bad. I didn't hear any clanking or anything like that. So after doing all this work and rebuilding and everything, I think it's going to run pretty well, but only time will tell. So hopefully this gets together soon to where I can get it running and get the coolant bled to see if that's gonna hold or not. I am on to actually doing part of the wiring harness after I get that one last bolt for the intake back on there. So hopefully I can figure that out real soon, and then in a blink of an eye I'll be having this on and that on, and maybe one of those on. Well, that's the blank spot. On a budget, this is fun. It's just I have to let the customer know that when you do a head gasket job, the head gasket doesn't come with everything. And I even pre-warned them about that piece right there, which has to do with the heater core. So that's the heat valve. When you turn your heat on and off, or from cold to hot, that is actually what moves. And that is in the back of the engine bay in Florida. And that is made of plastic while it's running 200-degree coolant through it on and off. So that is bound to break. But again, we are on a budget, so we're waiting for that to actually break. Right now, we're concentrating on the head gasket, and we are just about done with it. So that's all bolted down onto this, onto that. Here we go. And the trusty old wire brush has now cleaned up the crankshaft pulley, and I'm going to go ahead and throw that back on. I have now also installed the actual camshaft cover and buttoned up a few other little small things, but now it's time to get the drive belts kind of assembled and together. And don't forget, when you put that crankshaft in, do not lose that little piece of metal in there, because that is really clutch if you want this to really work. So don't forget that little piece of metal and keep on rolling. Just don't forget that little piece.
Ladies and gentlemen.
So not only did I lose that little key right there, because I forgot I left the crankshaft position sensor on the harness, and it goes behind that pulley. So I took that back off, and when that happened, that fell. It was up under there a little bit, and then I was able to actually get that out of there, or find it. But of course, when I put the sensor back in, I heard a small snap. So there's a little crack right there. I'm gonna try and stay on a budget, not go get a new one. So I don't know what happened with the screw, but I wasn't hammering on it either, and all of a sudden it just hurt it. So instead of just leaving it there and hoping that it stays there forever, I'm gonna go ahead and drop that out, and I'm gonna go ahead and at least try to do a small repair on it. Throw that back in there as gently as can be, and throw that pulley back on there onto the rest of the car. Alright, and after a small bit of solder repair, that side of it is all repaired. Looks smooth, not too shabby. So I'm going to try and put this one back in the car and continue on. Alright, so half of the harness is put back on, and I think there's a knock sensor down this side, the cam sensor is down this side, and I do think that the crank sensor wiring harness clippy thing is down that side as well. So that's all connected, as well as the throttle and relative air fuel kind of things going on there. This one's waiting for the intake box, but otherwise everything back there as far as this harness is connected. I still have this flippy floppy wiring harness here that I have to connect, but I cannot and will not until I start rebuilding the valve cover and putting the rest of the actual seals that go around that and around that part. Alright, I don't know if you can see that, but on the neck there it is kind of torn, so that's where these screws go. So that gets thrown out, and it's just as easy as one-handed, like that. And these are the spark plug seals. I think one of the last gaskets to be in this set, minus the actual rim here, but with just a little prying of a small pry bar, that was very easy to take off, as well as this one should be. I'm hoping. Yep, comes right out. I am a firm believer of being on a budget, so I see some people getting seal kits to push things like these in back inside, but using the old one is a perfect size to push the new one in. I'd pay more attention to not having a rubber mallet like this one that's a bit beat up and may leave stuff inside the actual valve cover. I'm more worried about that. So I think this one came in an IKEA set and looks solid. So A lot less chance of anything going to be falling and dropping around and rolling around the motor after I go beating around with this thing. So, and I am done beating the crap out of the seals. That was pretty darn easy and no damage to my little IKEA hammer. That one is still good, but doing this, I was starting to clean up the rim over here for all this, and lo and behold, where there's a lot of corrosion right here, well, there's a crack. There's a crack right in there, and it goes out that way. So I'm going to use some ancient JB weld that I found in my canister of different greases. So I'm going to use that, mix that up, hope that that works, shove it on the outside of there and let that dry and cure, and then I will be sealing this up. So here we go. And end result, I'm going to have to say problem averted. Having to get a new valve cover, which is needed, but this definitely slows that need down, and it's only been 6 minutes, so heck yeah, that worked. The first of it back into the motor now. Just a little dressing. This video is not sponsored by Royal Purple, but I sure as hell do use it. And just as I was about done with putting the valve cover back on, as these slipped on so nicely, I have to go and take this off again because this screw over here never bottomed and never had any kind of resistance. And I don't know if you can see down in that hole. Oh yes, you can. There is metal shavings sitting in, oh yeah, there you go, metal shavings in the motor. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this cover right the hell back off, and I'm gonna clean that up, see if I can tap it to, if I can't get it back on the original size and with it working well, then I'm gonna have to go ahead and tap it to a slightly larger size. And now all the ignition coils are in, and I got the other loom of wiring harness mainly connected there. Engine coolant temperature, the ignition coils, as well as it's wrapped around to the alternator. I cleaned up the threads with the thread chaser, and it looks better, and it started to hold. It went down. And after everything, after valve lashing and valve lapping, the actual valve clearance on the exhaust and the intake side, the new oil pump, new tensioner, refilling everything, and doing everything that you have seen here today, I'd be curious to see if the thing actually wants to start, right? Well, here's the end result. When I say this thing runs smooth, it runs really smoothly. What I noticed actually when I was refilling the coolant and this was idling here, the only ticking that I actually hear is from the actual injectors themselves down there. There's no noise anymore from anywhere in the valve train, in the intake or exhaust, which is amazing because I only used the exhaust side shims to actually have a real measurement of where they're supposed to be at. And then I went extra tight on the intake side, which put it closer to where it's actually supposed to be because I don't have the right actual shim of metal to do it properly. So this was amazing, and it turned out really, really well. The heat was only the small issue with the rebuild. It took a while for me to be able to heat the motor up safely and be able to get this to bleed correctly and all through the heater core there. So everything was going great, and I've driven it for about 50 miles now, and it is doing really, really well. Only check engine light on is for what was there before for the catalyst efficiency, so that is still an issue, but everything else is there. I haven't had to add very much, if any, coolant to that, so
it is doing fantastic. So I just wanted to say thank you for watching. This has been a big build or rebuild, but on a budget. It's definitely worth getting the valve lapping done and everything else. So I appreciate all the views, all the likes, all the subs, and I will definitely see you guys on the next one.